In this video, we're going to review the 10 ways that most organizations are being breached. This report's coming from the NSA and CISA, who are two of the largest government agencies responsible for overall security from a cyber perspective. These reports are coming from the red team, who are the attackers that try to gain access to the organization, and the blue team, who are the defenders who try to stop the attack from happening. So let's dive in. It's important to note that these teams have assessed the security posture of many DoD, federal, local, and state government agencies, as well as the private sector. And these issues are affecting not only small organizations, but large that already have a very mature cybersecurity posture. The first is default configuration of software and applications. A simple example is that you ask your IT company or a junior sysadmin to set up a new printer. During that process, they forget to change the default admin password. To make things worse, while they were trying to get it to either scan to email or scan to a network share, they were struggling and they entered in a domain admin into that device. A year later, doesn't really matter the time frame, an attacker gains a foothold into the network. They are able to authenticate into that printer because it is using a default printer, and they were able to scrape the domain admin password out of that device. They can now move laterally throughout the entire network, and most common EDR systems will not even catch that because it is a known account. Another good example is you're receiving off-the-shelf software or hardware which is being received by your team in an unsecure manner. An example would be network switches that come standard with a default password, iDRACs or remote access ILO controllers that have a default password, as well as IP phones. It could be a camera system. All of that stuff that is shipped with a default username and password, it needs to be changed. Another very simple example would be most Microsoft domain systems, which you're receiving the software, then you have to set it up. By default, they have unsecured protocols like older SMB or maybe older versions of TLS. So really, it's understanding what you're purchasing, and before going into production, doing a proper security audit and locking that network or system down. Number two is improper separation of user and administrative privileges. Hopefully, as you're watching this video right now, you're not actually logged in either as a global admin tied to Microsoft 365 or a domain or enterprise admin tied to Active Directory. A big no-no, you need to make sure that you're properly separating out your function from your day-to-day tasks when it comes to administrative privileges. Another example is what they call elevation scope creep. For all you senior admins out there that are farming out tasks to your juniors need to make sure that they are not over-privileging service accounts that are just not needed, but unfortunately, this happens. People get busy, there's a deadline they're trying to hit, and so next thing you know, that service account has elevated privileges because they had to get it working. There needs to be some sort of checks and balances in place so the seniors are making sure that the juniors aren't doing this. The juniors need to be comfortable going up to the seniors and saying, hey, I'm having a hard time getting this figured out. Can somebody please help me walk through this? Number three is organizations have insufficient internal network monitoring. So what they're saying here is that you need to have both your network sensors and your host-based sensors, and if you don't have those both optimally configured, you may not be able to detect an actual attack happening. So let's break down what they're talking about. So on the host side, this starts falling into your EDR, your MDR. This could be Windows Defender, this could be your CrowdStrike, this could be your Sophos. What they're saying is that you need to have the ability to detect an attack on that device and have proper logging stored there. But let's say that all you have is that MDR on the endpoint and nothing else, no network sensor. The problem is that they're going to see the attack as happening on the device, but they're not necessarily going to know where it's coming from, hence why the network sensor is important. With like Sophos, they have an NDR sensor. Basically what happens is you put this appliance on site and then you configure your port that any traffic going to the WAN or the LAN is mirrored to the sensor. This sensor will actually decrypt the traffic, so it's now looking at all the lateral movement happening on the network, and that would give the complete story of this is the device that is doing this payload to this host. On the flip side, if you had no EDR, MDR, and you just had a network sensor, you would be able to see the malicious activity going between two devices, but you wouldn't be able to know what's actually happening on the device that is under attack. Number four is lack of network segmentation. It is so important not only for performance, but for security to use proper VLANs to start splitting out your network into smaller chunks, right? Put your accounting department on their own VLAN. Have a general private network. The printers that the private network users are printing to should be on its own VLAN. IoT is on its own VLAN. You can put Wi-Fi on its own VLAN, definitely guest Wi-Fi on its own VLAN, and then look at your core infrastructure. Any of your servers, maybe your network switches, remote access controllers that are physically plugged into the servers should all be on their own network. Once everything is separated out and you implicitly deny all inter-VLAN trafficking, then you take a look and go, okay, what users or computers actually need to, for their job function, communicate to that network? And if the answer is no, just don't allow the traffic. And then even after this is set up, you need to have some sort of reoccurring way where you go and double, triple, quadruple check that nothing has changed changed, because you can set it up once and you think you're air gap tight, but then you don't realize that your junior sysadmin changed without your knowledge, and that vulnerability has been sitting there for 2 years. Number 5 is poor patch management. Many times these NSA cyber teams have come in only to find out that the breach occurred because a known vulnerability was not patched. Lack of patching and then the use of unsupported hardware and software that is way past the date of vendors providing security updates should be avoided at all costs. Additionally, leaders need to have a conversation about the balance between patching almost immediately, knowing there's a risk of outages for your users, versus the time it's going to take to test before implementing a patch. That is a conversation that each organization needs to have on their own. However, if you look at the most recent breach with Boeing, there's a lot of sources that are pointing to the fact that the Lockbit ransomware gang was able to get into Boeing by getting through a vulnerability called Citrix Bleed. And the challenge there is that it was a known vulnerability that wasn't patched. However, companies need time to vet out these patches before they're installed. The problem is, if you're already on a list where a hacker knows that you have specific software and then that vulnerability is released, what are you going to do? Number 6 is bypass of system access control. There are methods where, let's say that you as the admin log into a workstation with a domain admin credential. There are methods where attacker can actually pull the hash that was used for that login and then present that hash to other domain joined devices on the network and just get logged right in without ever knowing the password. Number 7 is weak or misconfigured MFA authentication methods. So there's a couple things to break down here. So the first one is, and this is common in a lot of DoD networks, the smart card or physical key that you're plugging in order to get access, there is a hash that is stored, and that hash is what allows access to the network. The problem is that IT administrators could misconfigure how that hash is handled, and if that hash never expires or doesn't change, someone can lift that hash and then without knowing the password gain access into the network. That's one method. The second is not having phishing resistant MFA set up. Here's 2 very simple examples. The first is if your MFA is tied to SMS text message, you're susceptible to a SIM swapping attack, which is very common nowadays. So you do not want to use text message as your MFA method. The second, and this might surprise some people, even the MFA with the Microsoft Authenticator app. You know how the app says, are you sure you want to log in? Then you have to put the 2-digit code in. That is no longer a secure method. There's a new program out there called Evil Jinx that makes it very easy for a hacker to trick your user by presenting your actual M365 branded page. And then they don't know any different, right? So they literally just put the 2-digit code in and there's a man in the middle of the attack happening. So a few ways to protect against that. One of them is to use Microsoft Intune compliance policies, to where if the device is not properly enrolled in Intune and meets compliance policies, then the login is denied. Another way to do it is to use the physical key token, because that requires the physical to be plugged in and there's no way for the hacker to do a man-in-the-middle attack. Number 8 is insufficient access control list on network shares. And one attack, the NSA team observed where the attacker was on an infected machine. They ran a command that then went ahead and scanned the entire network for all open shares. What's crazy is they then executed an open source tool that identified what type of files were in those shares. That way the attacker was presented with an easy to look at report, so they could just jump right in and start looking for what data they care about. And this is an issue for a couple of reasons. One, there may be something like a cybersecurity strategy or usernames and passwords. There's just something in there that really gives the hacker what they're looking for. We call this the gold mine. Or they might not get something as clear as like how to hack you, but they're able to gather more intelligence on the way the business operates. So they might learn who's in the accounting department and then use that information to perform another level of phishing to try to gain more of a foothold to another part of the network. Number 9 is poor credential hygiene, and this can really be broken down into 2 different scenarios. One is having an easily crackable password. These are passwords that are typically 15 characters or less that take low computing resources to attack. The root cause of these problems are laxed password complexity policies by IT. So if you have the ability as the IT administrator, you want to make sure you set a much more complex and length password requirement, and then also make sure you're following up with good training for users to make sure that they're either A, not reusing passwords, and B, are making them hard to guess and hard to understand. The second one, when this is a huge problem, is having passwords in clear text. What this means is that you're saving your passwords either in an Excel doc or maybe somewhere in the web browser. That's actually a very unsecure way to do it. They are definitely not encrypted there. And so by having your passwords in plain text, if that's ever lifted, the problem is that most attackers attackers can now move laterally and get as far as that user account's permissions allow them. Number 10 is unrestricted code execution. What the assessment teams have seen is that for a hacker to get persistence, they trick a user to running a piece of software. This software may be unverified or otherwise would not be allowed by the IT department. So you want to make sure that there's some sort of security protocols in place, whether you're using your EDR or Intune, to prevent not only the execution of untrusted software, but even go as far as maybe allow listing where only software that you allow on the network can actually run and be installed on the computer systems themselves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a follow. It's the best way to support the channel. And if you have any questions, you want to learn more about cybersecurity, post the comments down below and we'll take a look and maybe we'll do that for our next video. Thanks again. Have a good day.